My mission was to free people. The majority of the world live under the yoke of authoritarian regimes. In those cases, you have banking, you have internet, you have communication, but saying the wrong thing can get you in trouble, questioned, imprisoned, even killed. How valuable is it not to be killed?
Obi Nwosu is a Bitcoin advocate and CEO of Fedi.
Building the foundation for a future where money is private, sovereign, and beyond centralized control.
The problem with power is it's only available to the powerful. The other way to get security is through privacy. Satoshi Nakamoto, no army, no political office, no visible power, but they could walk freely amongst us and we wouldn't know. That's not because of power. They've chosen privacy. Which one would you choose?
Before, you were running a centralized exchange.
One of the first to be regulated in Europe.
And then you had to deal with the regulators, which was the choke point. How did you get here now?
This was 2013. 2 or 3 friends sent me this Bitcoin thing. I looked at the white paper and I said, okay, 1, it's a really great idea. 2, philosophy behind it, it's amazing. 3, it has staying power. Crazy idea. Let's do this. Let's make a Bitcoin exchange that doesn't suck. Money is another form of communication. VPNs allow you to communicate freely. We call this whole class of things Fedimint Technologies.
In many authoritarian regimes, it's life or death without VPNs.
How many lives have VPNs saved?
People don't classically think about Bitcoin in the same lens as something like a security tool like a VPN. Maybe just unpack that.
So,
all right, awesome. It's great to be back. I'm actually stealing one of my friend's podcast studios today. So if you recognize the background, Obi's actually been here for the second time this week.
Deja vu.
Deja vu. So, but like Obi and I got to spend a little bit of time this week just kind of talking about, I think, like where finance and money and communities can be under pressure. And so I really wanted to have this like open dialogue and conversation, and I didn't want to miss the moment while you and I were in El Salvador together. So just thanks. It's great to spend time with Obi. I'm going to say this wrong. Nwosu. Did I get that right?
You got that right.
No.
Yes.
You like slowly.
But I'm not surprised. You did a good job.
I think you like paused. You're like, let's see, maybe.
Yeah, you could be Igbo Nigerian almost.
Ooh, I think like everybody must say it. Obi-Wan Kenobi is like easy to remember, right?
Well, yes. Well, we have in our organization Fedi, the people who are on the ground are called Fedi Knights.
It makes sense.
So yeah, I don't mind being likened to a Jedi Knight.
It feels just right. Yeah. So I thought, you and I, it would be a good time to chat a little bit because your background is really diverse. You've ran an institutional exchange in London. You've been in tech for a long time. You sit on the board of a large foundation family office. But your day job is Fedi, which is like we'll get into. But you touch, I think, a lot of communities on the edge that are actually driving what maybe where the world is going. And so I wanted to maybe start off with just what you're seeing in these communities that your day job, Fedi, is kind of interacting where maybe capital's under pressure or money movement's under pressure, whether it's authoritarian regimes or whether it's, capital controls. Like your guys are moving money in dangerous and unique places.
Yeah, well, first of all, the way you say my background makes it sound really impressive. But I never really thought about it. But yeah, so Fedi ostensibly makes what we call a private Bitcoin wallet. But it does so much more than that. It's this all-in-one access to the private web. So you can hold money privately, you can communicate privately, and you can also access the web privately as well. Now, for many people in the West, that may not seem like a very important thing, but for the rest of the world, it can be priceless. The majority of the world live under the yoke of authoritarian regimes. So if you're in the West, you are the actual minority here. The global majority lives under the yoke of authoritarian regimes. In those cases, you have banking, you have internet, you have communication, but the use of that, saying the wrong thing, can get you in trouble, questioned, imprisoned, even killed. So how valuable is it not to be killed for over 3-4 billion plus people? We provide tools that are used by people around the world, many regions you would have heard about. Some are active zones, some are no longer active zones because hopefully we've delivered value. And that's one whole use case. And in fact, Fedi's genus was started in Oslo, at the Oslo Freedom Forum. And it was conversations with some of the bravest men and women that we had the honor of meeting. And I now call many of them friends that led to setting up Fedi after I'd recently sold my previous exchange. The other scenario is for people who are not living under yoke of regimes, but they are living under a certain wealth level. So we sometimes call it the global south. Again, it's another global majority. And in these cases, they may not be economically viable for people to provide banking, or if they are provided banking, it's at incredibly high rates. It's actually almost predatory, and so using technologies like Bitcoin and others, we can allow people to take control at the community level of their own banking, their own communication, and amortize that cost across the entire community, making something that was unaffordable affordable, something that was out of reach, in hand and under their own control, and they control their destiny. So those are two scenarios.
I love it. And I want to come to the financial inclusion part, maybe in the back half, but I think that's probably more people understand Bitcoin and sort of open finance in that lens. But less people maybe think of Bitcoin as this tool for freedom, flourishing, security, and privacy. And I think maybe the analogy might be VPNs, right? Like in many authoritarian regimes, it's life or death without VPNs.
How many lives have VPNs saved?
Right. Yeah. How many resistance movements, how many places under capital controls? There are wholesale countries where you cannot visit them if you don't have a VPN. But people don't I think classically think about Bitcoin and the tools and services you guys are building from an outsider's perspective in the same lens as something like a security tool like a VPN. So maybe just unpack that.
So as I said, money is another form of communication. And so VPNs allow you to communicate freely. And we call this whole class of things freedom technologies. And a freedom technology is something that has to have a few properties. One, it has to be decentralized, and another, it has to be secure. A good friend of both of ours is Jeff Booth, and he would say that Bitcoin will definitely succeed as long as it remains decentralized and secure. That's code for saying as long as it remains a freedom technology. So it has to be decentralized, so no one party can control it. And it has to be secure. And there are two ways to get security in this world. One is through power, and the other one is through privacy. So in the West, whether we realize it or not, we have access to power, even though you don't feel like it. By virtue of being in the West, you have geographic power. By virtue of the country you're born in, if you have a U.S. passport or a European passport, you have free access to travel around the world. My wife is from Kenya. She doesn't have the same. It's a nightmare to go to many places.
Yeah, we were talking about you guys were doing a little bit of world travel. And
we were doing the visa
you were getting
dance.
stuck, and it got expensive, and it was like a bounce.
Every journey for me, I can just walk to an airport or take an Uber to an airport, on the way buy my tickets and get on a plane. Whereas for her, it could be a 2 or 3 month planning process, which involves having to first fly back to Kenya to go to an embassy to get a visa, and then to fly back to the actual journey. And multiply that by several countries, it could get very expensive, or it's just basically, it's not just possible to travel. So, so you need either, for security, you either do that through power, and it could be geographic power, it could be political, martial, you could be Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan, like in one of the movies, or it could be financial power. The problem with power is it's only available to the powerful. The other way to get security is through privacy. Now, if you think about it, there's an example here of Satoshi Nakamoto. I'm guessing your audience is aware of who this person is, male or female. Now, if you think about it, they have no army. They have no political office, as far as we know. They have no visible power. But if he or she was around right now in El Salvador, they could walk freely amongst us and we wouldn't know. That's not because of power. And they have, by all accounts, about 1 million Bitcoins. So around about $100 billion worth of monetary power. They have the money to buy their own personal army, but they've chosen privacy. And if you were Satoshi, which one would you choose? Which one was a better form of security to you? To be able to walk around freely, do whatever you want, wherever you want, and no one will know and no one will hassle you, or reveal yourself to the world, have to have an army following you everywhere, going into the toilets, tasting everything you eat for the rest of your life, and probably be going through court cases for the rest of your life, just because you can afford it. This is a better form of security.
Well, that almost implies, though, there was a reason why he stayed anonymous or she stayed anonymous, right? Which is like in a surveillance state type of increasing culture, that person's life was going to change. And I think people in the West, maybe, you take for granted. I think increasingly privacy is, in certain parts in the West, actually are being given up, right? Like in many cases. So we're used to giving now all of the kids get on Venmo and they, everything is an open payment and they see it all. More and more we're giving all of our information into AI. And so, some corporation maybe knows a lot about our data. But you're talking about an opposite stance, which is, controlling your own data and having your own privacy is important. Why? Because that seems counter to where, I think a lot of people who maybe are growing up in the US or Europe are almost on the other side of that right now. At least that's the trend.
And I think we're going to be at an inflection point where that is set to change. But as you said, privacy is a very important thing, and if you and you in the West, you have a right to take it for granted, or you have the ability to take it for granted. You mentioned the surveillance state. I wanted to comment on that because that suggests it's something that happens at the governmental level. But when it comes to Bitcoin, we have to remember that actually, by default, it's worse than holding your money in a bank from a privacy point of view. With a bank or any other financial institution, they have full awareness of what you're doing and, by extension, the government. But if I go into a stop and buy something, the shopkeeper has no idea who I am, how much I own. I have privacy of the 8.3 billion people on the planet, the vast majority of them still, I have complete privacy from them. If I use Bitcoin without privacy, and I make a transaction, then anyone on the planet is able to monitor that forever. And so
go back retroactively, right? Which is what a lot of security ends up getting done.
And the merchant can see the transaction and later on monitor that, figure out that I have a lot of capital. And then their two older brothers who may be ne'er-do-wells could come around and give me a very, very bad day. And so we are seeing this. So already, if you're in France, you're seeing multiple events being cancelled. And that's not because of state surveillance. It's because these are public ledgers that anyone could see. So, and we've been tracking this, for example, and we've noticed that the numbers of these are increasing at an exponential rate. So we expect probably by the end of this year, 2026, that the rate at which rent attacks will be happening will be not once a week, but it'll be several times a day in the West. At that point, people will understand that we're in a new world. We're in a new world where privacy is key. We call it private is key. To protect your private keys, private is key. And so this is really a key thing that everybody needs to be aware of, and they will become aware of.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it's like this actually touches many stratus, right? Because you could be a large family office or institution. All of a sudden, you need a very separate privacy regime than maybe somebody that is fleeing an authoritarian government, which is also different than maybe if you're just a business owner and you don't want to get fleeced in certain countries. And so the first time I personally was involved in the product you guys use, I was in Indonesia, and they have capital controls there. And, some folks from the finance minister's office was literally outside of the door where we were doing Bitcoin transactions, which were, questionably possible in that region. And so that's another area where it could be just a business owner that has, a tax that has to go to the mob or that the government wants to be able to maintain. So there's a lot of cases which you guys are seeing, I think, maybe at the practical level on privacy tech used in the real world to basically equip commerce to happen, in regions where that might be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, our hypothesis, and I've got a West London accent, so TH is a difficult thing for me to pronounce. But our hypothesis is that eventually everybody will need and will understand that they need privacy, strong privacy of communication, strong privacy of the data that they hold, and also strong privacy of their money, which is another form of monetary communication. In the West, where most capital is, that understanding, the penny hasn't dropped. However, there are people today and over the last few years and decades who need privacy today. And they are often in countries that are under the yoke of authoritarian regimes. So as an organization, we set up explaining that ultimately everyone in the world will need this. But to begin with, phase one is to provide it to people who need it the most, people who need it now, and provide them service. And that is still, you're talking about in terms of number of noses as opposed to number of notes, monetary notes, is more than half the planet. In terms of wealth, it's not necessarily as much, but it's still a very big market. And we're supporting that market now. But it allows us to build a product which is ready for when the penny drops and people understand. And actually, at this point, we think it's over the next 6 to 18 months, they understand the need for privacy. And then it becomes a market for anybody who starts to say, you know what, now that an AI we've seen the launch or the dawn of vibe hacking. Everybody's talking about vibe coding, which is disruptively reducing the cost and expense to write code. I was at an event just at the end of 2025. It's always just between Christmas and New Year's, so you have to be very dedicated to go to this, called the Chaos Communications Congress, where the world's best white hat hackers come together. And the topic du jour was vibe hacking. And it was almost embarrassing. They were saying how normally sometimes decades plus of experience that was used to be able to hack systems can now be done by just talking to an LLM and say, please hack these people for me. And not only will it come up with the code, create the code, it will actually execute the code. And so what they're expecting, and it was talk after talk after talk, they're online, so anybody can do their own research, is that they're expecting this avalanche, this onslaught of hacking. And imagine the process where the skill and cost to hack goes down by several orders of magnitude. Any mischievous kid in university can hack everybody in the university, including the kids, including the students. Any disgruntled employee can now vibe hack any one of their bosses in their and you don't think that's going to happen? It's going to happen, and it's going to be incredibly frightening. And we're going to need tools to protect us.
Yeah, and what we see is that they're actually, not only are they just some person doing it, but it's just agents that are scanning open wallets, open like ports. So those things are just now running autonomously. And so we're certainly living in a different world. And I would agree it's under increasing pressure, right? It seems to be the trend. So I don't want to get too technical, but I do think it's an important point that, like, you mentioned that it needs to be secure and decentralized and private. And I think, you know, we probably understand why maybe you lose privacy by having some sort of central authority in some centralized bank in some authoritarian country, or really anywhere you're under pressure. But then on the other side, on the Bitcoin side, you know, that's a tool built by cypherpunks. But it also, as you implied, didn't go all the way on the privacy tech. And so just really quickly, you guys use eCash, which is really a layer 2 that's designed to be both decentralized, not having a central point of authority that can be a choke point, and at the same time have privacy technology built on top of something that's open and equipping, you know, maybe the rest of the world to be able to access it. So I want to maybe just touch really, really quickly on why is that a good solution versus something that someone would use in TradFi or a Swiss bank or whatever.
You can actually be centralized and have privacy, but then what you don't have is resilience. So decentralization gives you resilience. So if something exists in one place, no matter how tough it is, if it's damaged or destroyed, you go from 1 to 0. But if the same resource is spread out across 10,000 places and 1 or 2 or 50 of them are damaged, you don't go to 0. So it gives you resilience if you've decentralized, and even better, geographically decentralized. So the decentralization gives you staying power. Yeah. It gives you anti-fragility. The security comes from privacy. Because with privacy, as you said, it's the least expensive way to give yourself security, as I gave with the example of Satoshi. Now, eCash was the first ever digital currency. People often think it's Bitcoin, but there were many more attempts at digital currency before Bitcoin, decades more. And eCash was invented in the early 1980s. It's 25 years senior to Bitcoin. And even Satoshi, in his original announcement of Bitcoin, mentioned eCash. It has a number of pros over Bitcoin, and it has a number of cons. And the pros are it provides cryptographic perfect privacy. And also the other pro, which is non-obvious, is that it actually operates the way, if you were going to just guess how a Bitcoin works the first time you heard it, it should work. So it actually operates like cash in a wallet. You have a wallet, you have coins in the wallet, you have notes in the wallet. And if I want to buy something, I take some of the notes out, some of the coins out, add it up to the amount I want to pay you, and then I give you the notes. That's very intuitive, and that's what happens. With eCash, you will have digital notes, literally eCash, and you'll have different files for each note on your phone of different denominations. There'll be, let's just put it into dollar terms, but this isn't Bitcoin backed, but in dollar terms, you'll have a number of I don't know, I'll put it in UK currency because I don't know the notes or the coins. So you'll have a few pennies, you have a few 5 pennies, you have 10 pennies, you'll have a pound, and you have £5 fivers and tenors and so on. And you'll have a note which is different denominations of different random amounts. And if I wanted to pay you £5.52, I would take a fiver note, and I'll take a 50 penny note and two 1 penny notes. And then I'll just send them via WhatsApp or Telegram or write them on a piece of paper and give them to you. And now you have the notes and you have the money. That's how eCash works. So it's incredibly intuitive, and it has a number of side benefits. Because I can do that, I don't even have to have an internet connection. If I could have the notes on my device and I can display them on my screen, and I can show you my screen, you can write those notes down or type them into your phone and have the money, even if neither of us had an internet connection, which is very beneficial for environments where internet is expensive and so on. So it has all these utilities. The downside is it does require trust in what we call a mint. And the mint is and it needs to be backed by some other currency. It's not like Bitcoin, which is its own bearer. It's not a bearer instrument. So what is the currency that backs it? Back in 1982, very early days of the internet, the money that backed it was the US dollar. And that in the end caused a lot of challenges. Fast forward to the invention of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was invented. Satoshi recognized, and he talked about this multiple times, that it fell short for being a really true hard money. It needed to be decentralized, it was a big tick, but it fell short in the privacy properties department. It was pretty good, but it wasn't good enough. And he lamented that he wasn't able to achieve that. But and then fast forward a few years after that, my co-founder, but prior to I met them, invented something called Fedimint, which was a way of creating a version of eCash, but backed by Bitcoin, the world's hardest money, and also another improvement over the original eCash idea. Even within a particular mint, there was no single point of trust. So he solved two problems in one, making it the ultimate scaling solution for custody and privacy on top of Bitcoin.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And then I think one of the areas, so now you have a practical privacy and peer-to-peer payment tool that can be used in communities, because that's the other thing I think you've spent a lot of time with now is, hey, how can these communities be self-organizing and anti-fragile? Because in these areas that are, there's a lot of pressure, whether it's on capital controls or authoritarian regimes, the people are not living in isolation, but they're generally surviving through, whether it's a church group or a regional group or a Bitcoin circular economy. And so how have you guys thought about communities as sort of their own entities to be able to do commerce in this both private and secure way?
Yeah. So as you said, when you set up a Fedimint, it's there's still no single point of trust. So different people have to come together, trusted members of the community, to build one of these Fedimint federations, as we call them, and they run them on behalf of the community. So for the rest of the community who may be not so technically able, who may be more risk averse, or they just don't have the resources to run this themselves, these chosen individuals, we call them guardians, we label them guardians.
Fitting name.
It's a fitting name. Will take on the heavy lifting on behalf of the community. But the question is, what structures does it make sense for this to fit within? And the structures are of communities. And those communities can be anything from any form of organization of people. So it can be a village or a town, or it could be an NGO or an activist group, or it could be a very large company as well. And internal to the company, you have money moving around between departments, expenses, and so on. As opposed to giving that money to multiple banks, you can effectively take control and run it yourself with your own Fedimint, which would be one legal person. So it wouldn't be a money transfer scenario in that case. So that was
so it's like a private, decentralized community bank within that.
That's one. It's
not a perfect analogy, but yeah.
But but that's conception would be a good way to think about it. And the light bulb for me was recognizing that we're taking freedom technologies, but they're a multiplier. The 0 to 1 is the fundamental human technology. And that's the technology, the invention of community. Because an invention or a technology is something that's extrinsic, outside of you, but that you create, that gives you benefit. And if you take, and this revelation came to me, I mean, I don't think I'm the first person who came up with this, but for me personally, it hit home actually as a side story. Several years ago, first time I ever went on safari, this was in South Africa. well before Fedi. I was still in the middle of running this was just before COVID, in fact. And so COVID was, little did I know, COVID was about to hit literally days later. And I was on safari, and it was a bucket list item to go on. And while going through the Kruger National Park, I kept seeing these hills in the middle of the park, and I eventually asked our guide, "What are these hills?" And he said, "They're not hills; they're termite mounds. They're big hills. They are big hills. I mean, they were in sort of building heights. They were 2 to 3 story buildings high. So I thought they were hills, but they were termite mines. Termites, they were pretty big though. You don't want to be bitten by them, but they are still termites." And he then went on to explain that what's even more interesting, they're as deep as they are high. So if it's 3 stories high, it's 3 stories deep. And they exist for the purpose of controlling the temperature of the food source of the termites, which is fungi, which is right at the base. So 2 to 3 stories below the earth. And they are able to withstand torrential rains, the weight of an elephant standing on top of them, anteaters trying to destroy them and burrow into them, incredible cold, incredible heat. But the temperature at the bottom where the fungi is has to be regulated to within 1 degree and never change. So it's basically a massive air conditioner, but it doesn't use any electricity, any power, and it maintains that temperature. We today, as humans, cannot create something like that. We still don't know how it works. So this is an incredible creation of these termites. Termites, interestingly, like bees and humans, are one of the few animals or creatures on the planet that form complex society, form community. Most of us are very simple society or none at all. And so when you thought about it, you're thinking, well, what are human superpowers? It's like, oh, it's our brain. Clearly, it's our brain. Or it's our opposable thumbs, our ability to manipulate the world. The other thing we have is community. Now let's translate it to the termite. The termites don't have a brain. They have a couple of nerve cells. So it doesn't even really qualify as a brain. Poor termite. They don't have opposable thumbs. They don't even have hands. They manipulate the world with their mouth. So they literally have very little ability to manipulate the world. So they don't have those 2 superpowers. So they only have complex society. And with just that, they were able to create something that still defies our understanding of how it works. And with that, I realized that our real superpower of those 3 is community. And then I sort of stuck there in my mind palace to take a Sherlock Holmesism, if you like the series.
Yeah.
And a number of years later, I saw Fedimint. I by happenstance, I bumped into my co-founder in another thing, the Hackers Congress Paranelli Police, which is an incredible space. It's now closed. And he explained this idea, and I realized we can combine the world's and the human's most fundamental technology of community with freedom technologies, using something like Fedimint, with freedom technologies like Bitcoin and Lightning and Fedimint and so on, to level up humanity. And with that understanding, and with the understanding of the impending privacy apocalypse, or whatever you want to call it, we decided to set up Fedi.
Yeah. So like, I think, you can't have commerce without community, and commerce is also a critical part. Like, it's the fundamental feature of human society, right? Like, we barter goods and services so that way we can be more productive, right? And we specialize in all of these things. And so how do you see these communities now sort of self-organize? These the equivalent of the mounds that you saw. You guys are now communities kind of all over the world, in both, hard to reach places, authoritarian places, places that are underbanked. And so, what is the observation you're making now kind of globally across these communities? Because I think one of the things I've personally seen that surprised me is even in the Bitcoin circular economies, which you and I have become friends over, they have different challenges, but they also are very, very similar in their own kind of way. They self-organize and make their own sort of self-commerce. So, but you guys are seeing them now globally, and you guys have probably very unique visibility into these sort of markets.
Yeah. I mean, we're still a young company. We're like, well, the numbers, we're growing at the moment. So, but we're about 40 people. By the end of this year, it's 2026, it will be over 100 people. Still won't be huge, but we'll be growing.
Congratulations. Building companies is hard.
Building companies is hard.
Yeah.
This isn't my first rodeo, luckily. But that's why I'm bored, probably. But as I mentioned before, that we combine the fundamental human technology of community with freedom technologies. And that's part of our strategy. We're not coming in to explain to you how to run your community. If there are 50 different communities, there are 50 different ways in which they run it, 50 different structures. Some communities, the savers and the powers behind those communities are the women in the community. Some it's the men. Some of them are very much pushed forward by some sort of religious context. Some it's very much around some sort of work practice or industry. We see everything in between, and we just listen and provide tools to multiply what they do. That's why you say what we do is a multiplier, but the 0 to 1 is the community technology. They create something, and then we just put fuel onto their community fire. And that's why, as a business, we have two parts. We have the technology arm, and we also have people on the ground. I said what we call the Fedi order, the Fedi Knights. And they're right now predominantly in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. But it's important to understand that, and a lot of people don't get this when they look at it for high level, that's part one. If you want to put Star Wars, it's like episode 1. Yeah. Episode 2 is an offering that we think is of global significance, but we want to forge it in the fires of the most difficult environments first, because a bit like the Swiss Army knife or the Land Rover, if you can throw a Land Rover out of a plane and onto the ground in the middle of a war, and it can continue working, or a Swiss Army knife can be used by the Swiss Army in battle over multiple decades, then it can definitely open your can of beer in the West.
When I'm camping,
and it can definitely take your kids, your two twins to on the school run.
Yeah,
and you can trust it because it's been forged in that fire. But the ultimate opportunity is global.
Yeah, indeed. And I think one of the things that comes out of that to me is where community and commerce or payments or money flows interact, at least in the business world, is oftentimes these super apps that, maybe ironically are actually in the most authoritarian places, right? So when we look at, the WeChat, WePay, or these other sort of super apps, they are communities and commerce and money flow, but they're almost always the places that they win the most tend to be highly centralized. So I find that really, really interesting that you guys are taking a very different approach to community plus commerce, where super apps are very, very centralized. But I also think, you and I know some of your capital partners, and they're absolutely wonderful people. And I think it's really interesting because on the outset, you guys have raised venture capital. You're not some social project that's, just an NGO, but you're building a real business with real impact and leverage. You have a lot of prior experience building, big companies. But I'm curious, what the conversation was when you went and raised capital, because from the outside, it would look like if you were running in Silicon Valley or New York or something like that, Fedi would look more like a social project and less like a venture funded company that, has some big financial outcome. So how did you think about that? How are kind of the, really awesome capital providers that are working with you, kind of come alongside and make the case?
There's so much there. So just first of all, to go beyond, before going on that, I'm glad you said the super app. We try to not say it ourselves, but effectively Fedi has the same functionalities as all those other super apps, but it's built on Fedimint Technology. So it's fully open source. Anybody can see the code. They don't have to trust. They can verify themselves. For the monetary aspects, it uses Bitcoin, Lightning, Fedimint. For the conversational and chat aspects, we use other technologies that are highly tested, highly regarded, used by the German military and over a decade, etc. But again, fully open source and decentralized. So it's like one of those, but it's not possible for us to control any aspect. It's all decentralized. So it's not, don't be evil, it's can't be evil. But we are still having the same functionality of those. And if you think about it, the most popular apps in the world are those super apps.
Yeah, it's a cypherpunk super app.
And many of them now, Telegram, WeChat, Alipay, all have over 1 billion users. And so going back to your question as a context, the potential for this is, imagine you can have something which is like the most popular apps on the planet, but also provides you perfect privacy, and there's no possible way for the people who are running it to become evil. So over time, especially as awareness for privacy increases, we have a way to take market share from those, with the aim eventually, over time, to get to hundreds of millions, if not billions of users. And we know it can be done, and our USP is something that would be very difficult for them to copy. Because to copy it, they would have to completely throw away all of the code and rewrite it to be decentralized and private, which in many cases they may be actually prevented from doing so because it's not in the interest of their governments. So they literally cannot compete, and we can take that market. So that is the value proposition, that we start with the most difficult clients because they have the clearest need and they understand today why privacy is key and private is key. But very soon, everybody will understand that. And we're already seeing at this event, we're starting to see communities who a year ago would say, well, we don't need that. Privacy is not that important. 1 year later, they've come around and they said, okay, we've seen a lot of things happening. We're seeing people getting wrench attacked. We're seeing all this sort of stuff. And we've been looking around for ways where we can still have an easy to use system, but it's private. And you're the only one there. And because we spent the last, on some of the technologies over 5 years, and as a business, 3.5 to 4 years building it. And for someone to start now, it would be very challenging.
I must say though, it's how did you get there? Because it's your prior gig was you were running one of the biggest exchanges in Europe and England, and so I want to go backwards now. It's a little bit to your origin story, because you're creating this super app that's venture funded, could touch 1 billion people, but it's very cypherpunk philosophy, super hardened. But before that, you were running a centralized exchange that was
one of the first to be regulated.
Yeah, exactly. And then you had to deal with the regulators, which was the choke point and all these things. So how did you get here now? Because it was probably a lot of things that you saw go wrong that influenced.
So if you fast forward back, I was a geek I discovered my first computer in secondary school. So from about, you would say around 12 or so, really got into computers. Within a year, I was the top person in my school, and I was writing code. Before leaving secondary school and going to university, I was writing neural networks. I went to university, which is a form of AI software program.
Not to throw shade, but you're not you're not a 21-year-old right now. So this was neural networks a little bit. Before.
This is, right now I'm 50. So this is neural networks
when we were in college.
In the mid 90s. Yeah. And so it's very early. And I went on to university to study computer science and cognitive science, and went on to continue to do AI in university. But this was very early. But I would have probably gone into academia and research and then sort of struggled to survive until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and then started being thrown multi-million-dollar AI contracts. But instead, in university, I discovered the internet. It was burgeoning at the time, and I went into the European .com space, and that continued for many years. But during that period, a few things happened. One, so I'm a child of two worlds. I was conceived in Nigeria. I was born in the UK. And as I grew up, I like to say that my mother made it to Heathrow Airport, and then I combat rode down the stairs into the UK. And so as I grew up, I would, myself and my brother would go backwards and forwards between Nigeria and UK, and that means we experience the power or the cost of inflation. We could see the different inflation rates and how life changed over time by going backwards and forwards. So that made me very early on aware of the destructive power of high levels of inflation in the world. It made me also very aware of the inequities in the world, just by virtue of your postcode, your global postcode, how life could be so different from you. And we saw cousins who were born in Nigeria, direct cousins, would on average be about a foot shorter than me. So yeah,
I don't know if we're a cousin, but
you're my cousin. Our cousins in the US would be about 3 inches taller than us on average.
I didn't drink that milk, I guess. Product of the Latino side, I guess.
No comment. But and that was sort of a visual sort of manifestation of just purely the differences of geography, because we were direct cousins, same blood, same DNA. So that struck me. And then the second thing was I very early on discovered my love for computers. So I was a geek. So fast forward, and 2011, I think it was. No, I know it was 2011. A number of my friends who knew me very well, knew how I would go on about the inequities in the world, and that the ideal should be a meritocracy, where it didn't matter where you are. The harder you worked, the more, ideally, the more you should gain, and the world loses out without that, because it's probably
7 billion Einsteins were missing.
Right now, there's Einsteins missing. There's all this sort of stuff. And so that was one thing. And the other thing, I was like, geek. I love new, interesting technology. So within a period of a couple of months, 2 or 3 friends sent me there's this Bitcoin thing. This is right out of Obi's street. And so they informed me about it. I looked at the white paper. I thought it was a really interesting idea. I didn't really think that it would be decentralized enough to be able to withstand being destroyed. But I did think it was great technology. I bought a little bit and forgot about it. I was in the middle of my previous startup. 2 years later, sold the startup, and a co-founder that would go on to be the co-founder of the exchange I operated said, well, I think we should set up I'd angel invested in his previous company. We should set up a Bitcoin exchange. Well, Bitcoin's still around, and I checked, and it was still around, and my Bitcoin was worth significantly more at that time. And this was 2013, and I said, okay, 1, it's a really great idea. 2, it's great technology, and the philosophy behind it's amazing, because philosophy is really important to me. And 3, it has staying power. Let's do this, and crazy idea. Especially, it sounds today like silly, but our idea at the time was, let's make a Bitcoin exchange that doesn't suck. That was the idea.
That was a differentiating. Back then, that was a differentating factor.
That was a massive.
I remember.
Especially in the UK.
Yeah, or just sucks less than everybody else. You didn't even have to get to don't suck.
Well, we were aiming high.
You were aiming for don't suck. Okay.
And it was like just doesn't suck, because people were, they were getting hacked all the time. Mount Gox was about to implode.
Oh, I remember.
All this sort of stuff was happening in the UK. It was a shambles. And so we launched, and we started. It was the proverbial 3 people literally above a garage. Funny enough, in the city of London, a stone's throw from the Bank of England, near Chancery Lane, Law and Order, and next to Hatton Garden where the goldsmiths were. So we were above these goldsmiths building this new digital gold exchange. And Chancellor next to Chancery Lane, round the corner. So the feng shui of the location was it must be here. And we launched, and we started with free, and we grew and grew. We got to the point where we were the number one exchange in the UK. And our vision was to liberate people from the existing inflationary system and provide them an alternative. And that's how we started. We did apply, as every young group did, to the Financial Services Authority, then FSA. It hadn't yet renamed to the FCA. And explained what we were doing and said, could we be regulated, please? And they said, no, because we don't consider this money, and jog on, basically. You're allowed to do whatever you want. We don't consider it money, but you can rely on this document as evidence that you can do whatever you want. And we said, okay. It's made it very difficult to get banking and so on and so forth, but we soldiered on. And we grew. We got to the point where we were the most liquid GBP to Bitcoin pair in the world. We had a subsidiary at one point which was based in the BVI and so on, which was the first physically delivered Bitcoin futures exchange in the world. We were one of the first exchanges to be regulated in Europe. And we also were listed on, I believe it was the NASDAQ for the Bitcoin GBP currency pair through Blockstream for the GBP pricing. It was for us. We did the UK's equivalent of we did you can see it still on BBC Parliament, where I gave evidence in front of the Treasury Select Committee on cryptocurrencies and all that sort of stuff. So definitely heading down that path. But a couple of things happened, but the end result is they made me realize that over a period of nearly a decade, I'd gone from being the jailbreaker to the jailkeeper. And that's not why I signed up for doing what I was doing. And so once I had that realization, in fact, it was, I don't want me to tell the story, but it was actually, I was in Gibraltar and I'd just been given this, we'd just been awarded this a new regulatory license, and it was amazing. And the regulators were incredible, and they were friends, and it was really good people. But,
can you imagine just saying all those words on the cypherpunk side?
Yeah, but it's I mean, yep. I'm pragmatic, but a person's a person. I look at their heart, and they were great people in this case. But I then went back to my room in this hotel, and I looked out the window in the hotel, and out the back in the distance was Spain, and it was green and lush. And then in front of it was an airport, the Gibraltar airport, so a military airport, and where all the planes land. And so it was an airport in front of Spain, and then there was an airport, Gibraltar airport, and in front of that was a graveyard. So right next to me was a graveyard. And I just thought, just thinking about it, it was like someone was trying to tell me something. If I'm here, I'm at the graveyard. And if I'm there, there's this plane which means freedom towards green and lushness. And I was like, I think I'm going down the wrong path. This is not why I signed up. Yes, we're a profitable business. Yes, it's growing. But my mission was to free people. And so within a couple of months of that, we decided to sell the company, and I restarted my mission. I got reacquainted to that mission of finding ways to get as many people on this planet, empowering them with freedom technologies. And so that's how it started. I had ideas. All of them were bad. But luckily, I met my co-founder, and he mentioned this technology, Fedimint, on a chance encounter. And when I realized it, I realized this was the solution. What I and many other Bitcoiners have been trying to do is get everybody to self-custody. And we know that mathematically that's not possible to do. So, but then how was I going to get people to be empowered and be more decentralized if I wasn't able to do that? And Fedimint was a way of, instead of getting people empowered one person at a time, you get them empowered one community at a time. And what we found, even from early on, our average community size was about 5,000 to 10,000 people. At 5,000 to 10,000 people a community, it becomes much more feasible to get 1 billion people online. You're now talking about, if you have around 300 or 400 nights onboarding people, they each have to onboard around about 20 communities a year over 5 years to get to 1 billion people. And that's very feasible. If you try to get 1 billion users, it's less feasible.
Well, you know, like large social networks have all grown in some way like that, right? Facebook is famous for starting off only being in Harvard and then only being in Stanford, and these super nodes sort of allow you to get the density of the network, which is super interesting. I want to end because, like, so you've gone from, you know, cypherpunk to institution back to community, but then you have another area that, you know, I think's unique, where you're doing work with some institutional family offices and foundations, you know, I think maybe to extend the philosophy of freedom and access around the world. And, you know, we have people in the audience who are either running a family office or involved in a foundation or some kind of institutional capital. And so I wonder what the bridge from cypherpunk to community to freedom tech to now, you know, sort of large capital allocator that presumably is trying to do some good around the world. Like, how is the conversation for you in that sphere? Because it's very different than, you know, a sphere that's operating under authoritarian pressure or underbanked. And so maybe describe a little bit of just kind of your learning sitting as a board member for, you know, a key foundation and how you've thought about it.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about board membership of Reynolds Foundation, and which is it's an exceptional organization. So the story began a couple of years ago. I'd organized an event with the Human Rights Foundation first, who were one of the first to see the potential for many of the communities that they advocate for Fedimint and Fedi. And in fact, it was...
Which put on the Oslo event that you were at. Yeah,
they put on the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is their marquee event. And it was at that event that led me to come back, passion in my eyes, and realizing and talking to my co-founders, saying that we've got to take this from just being an incredible technology to being a business. And I'd sold my exchange. I was maybe going to take, 6, 12, 5 years off or whatever and chill. But instead...
Type A people don't do good sitting on islands.
But this was like 3 or 4 months after selling. And I said, okay, once more into the breach we go, as they say. And we agreed to start a business. 6 days later, we'd closed the initial round. We didn't even have a company. We didn't. The investment was made to company to be named, and we only chose a select group of investors that we knew we wouldn't have to explain the value proposition or the background, because that can complicate from my previous experience of fundraising. And we started the business, but 6 months later, we raised another larger round again, and we did this in Costa Rica, and at a location which is the same location where the Bliss Summit happens, which is a
incredible
event.
special event. Yeah,
it was there I befriended the CEO, not then at the time, but soon to be CEO of the Reynolds Foundation. And he became increasingly aware of the power of Bitcoin and so on through multiple sources, not just myself. Fast forward, I was at an event called the African Bitcoin Conference in Ghana, and Alvaro flew to Africa from Costa Rica, which was a long flight. It's about 30 plus hours. And he stayed for 1.5 days. He flew specifically just to ask me to join the board, which was an incredible honor. And when I saw him, I was completely shocked. He didn't tell me. He just said, "Hey, I'm here, and can you join the board?" He also got Jack Dorsey to join and many others. And I said, "Definitely, I'm here for you." So of the Reynolds Foundation. Later I met Tim Reynolds, who again is an exceptional person. He was one of the co-founders of Jane Street. And the Reynolds Foundation is incredibly philosophically aligned, because I said it always starts with philosophy. And their philosophy is to help spread and defend democracy in the world. And they employ massive resources, not only financial, but also in terms of skills and experience and research, every aspect around this. They have 3 remits. Others are related to spinal cord research, and also related to art and so on. But the bulk goes towards this around democracy. And I was brought on boards to help with related to technology, freedom technologies, and advising on anything related to that aspect. And so the understanding and the insight is this, that no matter what you care about in the world, if you care about women's rights, then you care about reducing or getting rid of autocracies. If you care about children's rights, you care about autocracies. Because if you look at any metric, these are always worse in those environments. If you care about medical outcomes, if you care about anything else, education levels, you care about increasing democracy and reducing autocracies. And if you care about freedom, then you care about democracy. And so with that understanding, I had to answer the call. I'm on a number of boards, but actually over the coming year, I'm coming off many of them. The only one board I'm staying on, because I want to focus so much on Fedi, is the Reynolds Foundation, because it's so values aligned, philosophically aligned. They're all incredible boards, by the way, but this one is just the most aligned to what Fedi is doing.
Yeah, man, it's incredible. So, you're looking, it's kind of full circle from your origin story to now, having a place where you're using technology to drive, really ultimately human flourishing, because, these tools of security, privacy, freedom are all required for us to have economic empowerment and human flourishing, which I think, in places that you and I have spent a lot of, you want to be able to increase access around the world, and that drives, increased economies, increased, social good and all these things. So, A, just thank you for the work you guys are doing. B, where do people find, if they want to follow your work or Fedi or anything you're involved with, where should they go?
No, just before saying that, I want to say, one, I feel incredibly blessed to be doing this and having the opportunity to be living my ikigai, if you know the Japanese philosophy of your reason for living. And I before I say where to find me, I do want people to understand the thing that drives me and drives the Reynolds Foundation and drives the team at Fedi is the understanding that we all deserve to be free. And until everyone on this planet is free, no one truly is. And that's the thing to understand. Until everyone on this planet is free, no one truly is. So I really like people to remember that. But in terms of where to find out more about me, you can find me on Twitter. My name is Obi on Twitter. I'm old, so I have a very old URL, very short. Even shorter than Jack's.
Yeah. You didn't have to fight the trademark guys over at the LucasArts or whatever.
And then for Fedi, my organization, it's Fedi, Fedi.xyz.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
What an honor to spend time with you, man. Thanks for sharing your insight. And I think it's a world we all believe in, man. So we'll be rooting for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.